What if silence was no longer safe? Imagine waking up, and every whisper in someone's head becomes your reality. Their lies, fears, secrets, broadcasted without control. Humanity has always hidden behind masks. But what happens when the masks melt away? It began with a whisper, not in the air, but in the mind. At first, it felt like an echo, a thought that wasn't your own. Then another and another. Within hours, it was undeniable. You were hearing the thoughts of others, strangers passing on the street, the barista making your coffee, the person next to you on the bus. Their voices were clear, internal, raw, and unfiltered. Panic didn't come from the noise. It came from the realization that it wasn't stopping. Scientists scrambled for an explanation. Some blamed a neurological virus. Others believed it was a leap in human evolution, a glitch in consciousness. But there were no infections, no external symptoms, just access. A sudden, seamless connection to the inner dialogue of everyone around you. At first, some found it fascinating. Children giggled at the silly thoughts of parents. Lovers whispered apologies in their minds. Students cheated effortlessly on exams. But the novelty evaporated quickly, because thoughts aren't always kind, or appropriate, or true. The veil of privacy, the last sanctuary of the human mind, was gone completely. People began to isolate, covering their ears even though it made no difference. Earplugs, music, meditation, nothing could silence the flood. And then came the worst part. You could no longer lie to yourself. Your own thoughts echoed louder against the chorus of others. The first to hear every mind wasn't blessed. They were cursed. At first, it was just a few, then a few hundred, then thousands. Within days, the entire planet could hear each other, not through technology, not with devices, but raw, mental, noise, unfiltered, uncontrolled. In crowded cities, it was unbearable. You couldn't walk down a street without hearing 100 voices all at once. Some were boring, some were hilarious, some were terrifying. Mothers heard the doubts of their children. Lovers heard the betrayals whispered in the minds of their partners. Neighbors discovered the hatred buried just beneath polite smiles. And worst of all, people realized how often we lie. Not out loud, but in our heads. You see, society wasn't built on truth. It was built on filters, on secrets, on silence, on the delicate choice of what to reveal and what to keep locked away. Without those boundaries, nothing felt safe. People stopped showing up to work, stopped talking to one another, stopped making eye contact. The world became a place where your every flaw, every judgment, every private insecurity was now public. We had achieved global telepathy, and it was tearing us apart. Secrets gave us structure, the things we didn't say, the thoughts we chose to keep, they protected us. But now, nothing could be hidden. Relationships, once built on trust and boundaries, began to rot from the inside. Marriages crumbled overnight. You could hear your partner's regret, their resentment, the fantasy about someone else, the unspoken boredom. Friends fell apart, not because of what they said, but because of what they thought while smiling. Jealousy, disgust, fake admiration. Children overheard the exhausted thoughts of their parents. Employees heard what their bosses really thought about them. Every moment of self-doubt, every suppressed insult, every impulse was now broadcast in real time. And society began to fracture. Religion struggled to survive. Faith requires mystery, belief in the unseen. But when priests, imams, rabbis all had their private doubts exposed, entire congregations lost their foundation. Governments collapsed faster. Politicians couldn't pretend anymore. Corruption, greed, deception, it all echoed in their thoughts. There were no more scandals, just raw, permanent exposure. Justice systems crumbled too. There was no need for trials, judges, jurors, even the accused. Every thought could be heard. Verdicts were instantaneous and terrifying. The truth was never the problem. It was the constant access to it. Because knowing what someone thinks in a moment of anger or fear doesn't show who they are. It shows a fragment, a glitch in an emotional storm. And we built our judgments on that single, unfiltered second. With no secrets left, society had no more structure, only noise. It didn't happen with riots or war. It happened with silence. The streets emptied, schools closed, airports sat abandoned, not because of fear of violence, but fear of knowing too much. Education broke first. How could a teacher instruct a classroom when every student hears their doubts, their frustration, their exhaustion? Parents pulled their children from schools. Some tried homeschooling, only to be crushed by their own mental noise being broadcast in return. Economies followed. Meetings turned to chaos. Managers heard the resentment. Employees heard the contempt. Deals fell apart before a word was spoken. No contract, no handshake, no alliance could survive unfiltered thought. Retail collapsed. Buyers could hear the desperation of salespeople. Sellers could hear buyers' guilt, mistrust, or financial strain. Every transaction poisoned. Transportation halted. Bus drivers, overwhelmed by passengers' internal chatter, veered off routes. Pilots grounded themselves, unable to block the anxiety of hundreds of passengers pressing against their skulls. Governments couldn't function. Cabinet rooms turned into arenas of shame. Alliances between countries disintegrated the moment private strategies and true motives were laid bare. Even families broke down, not in rage, but in retreat. People became afraid to speak, but worse, they were afraid to think. So they hid, in soundproof rooms, in underground bunkers, in forests where their minds might finally echo back only silence. Civilization hadn't burned down. It had shut down. The human race hadn't gone extinct. It had disconnected. Our brains weren't built for this. Every second, we already battle our own thoughts, memories, emotions, instincts. But now, we carried the weight of hundreds, thousands, millions, layered, overlapping, never-ending noise. At first, people tried to adapt. Meditation apps surged. Headphones became essential. Isolation pods sold out across the world. But you can't mute what's in your head when it's not your own. Sleep disorders became a global epidemic. Dreams weren't private anymore because your subconscious still spoke and others still heard. Hospitals overflowed, not with physical injuries, but with cognitive collapse, panic attacks, identity confusion, schizophrenia-like symptoms in people who were once mentally healthy. Doctors gave it a name: thought saturation syndrome, the mind's inability to filter signal from noise. You forgot who you were, your beliefs, your memories, even your voice, blurred by the constant intrusion of others. Suicide rates spiked in every region, and not because people wanted to die, but because they couldn't think alone. Then came the emotional breakdowns, hearing every angry, violent, or perverse impulse from the minds around you. Even if no one acted on them, destroyed trust, empathy, and the concept of innocence. Children developed anxiety before they could speak. Elderly forgot who they were in the torrent of thoughts that weren't theirs. The human mind, resilient, beautiful, imaginative, wasn't designed to be a radio antenna. And now, it was short-circuiting. When society collapses, something always rises in its place, and this time it was the mind black market. It started with desperate hackers, engineers, and neurotinkerers, people who couldn't take the mental noise anymore, people who wanted the silence back. The first solution was crude: mind jammers, tiny implants or wearable bands designed to distort your thought signals. They didn't block thoughts completely, but they scrambled them, like static on a radio. Governments tried to ban them, but enforcement was impossible. How do you police what someone is thinking? Soon, richer people had custom-designed neuro-shielding suits, helmets and garments that filtered their thoughts in and out. The poor, meanwhile, wrapped their heads in foil, rubber, and wire in hopes of buying a second of peace. Underground markets sold synthetic suppressants, chemical cocktails that slowed brain waves just enough to blur your mental signature. The side effects? Memory loss, speech issues. But for some, it was worth it. Others turned to cults, groups who believed total telepathy was divine punishment. They cut out their tongues, sealed their ears. Some even attempted lobotomies to silence the world once and for all. And still, the noise persisted. Soon, entire cities went dark. No technology, no traffic, no communication. Just clusters of humans living in near total isolation, hidden in silence domes. Massive structures designed to block mental signals completely. What began as a human gift became a curse that drove us underground. The price of hearing everyone was forgetting how to hear yourself. Years passed, and what didn't kill us began to change us. Some people didn't break under the pressure. They adapted. They learned to navigate the noise, like surfers riding a tsunami. They developed techniques to focus on specific thought frequencies, to tune out the chaos, to survive inside the storm. These people were called filters. They became guides, counselors, leaders of a fractured species. But evolution didn't stop there. Children born after the awakening were different. Their minds expected the noise. They didn't cry for mental overload. They didn't flinch at hearing 1,000 thoughts. They flowed with it. Their brains formed new neural pathways, faster connections, higher processing capacity. Some could even shield their thoughts from others at will. And just like that, humanity split. The pre-minds, those born before the shift, struggling to cope. The post-minds, born into the mental storm, thriving in it. Conflicts began again, not over land or religion, but over thought access. Should minds be open or closed? Should we allow private consciousness to return or evolve into a collective one? The post-minds viewed privacy as primitive. The pre-minds saw constant exposure as psychological slavery. A new war was brewing, not of weapons, but of minds. The next stage of human evolution wasn't physical, it was cognitive. And in this new world, survival didn't depend on muscle or money, but on mental resilience. In the beginning, thought was personal. It was your last line of defense, the one place where you could retreat, reflect, be truly yourself. But now, there was no yourself. Thoughts flowed between people like air. Identity became fluid. You couldn't always tell which ideas were yours, or what you'd absorbed from someone else. Philosophers argued, are we individuals anymore? Or are we becoming one single, fractured mind? Language began to decay. There was no need to speak what others already heard. Words became inefficient, then irrelevant. Art, too, lost its mystery. A painting no longer surprised you, because you could feel the artist's process before the canvas was finished. Music became redundant. Why sing when your audience already knows what you're feeling? Culture flattened. Traditions blurred. The rituals that once defined us faded beneath a universal mental stream. In some regions, people voluntarily uploaded their thoughts to shared consciousness servers. Everyone could access everyone. No secrets, no privacy, no borders. Just one global, synchronized intelligence. Others resisted, desperate to preserve individuality. They clung to memory journals, isolated communities, mental encryption techniques. But resistance was a losing game, because once you've heard every voice, once you've shared every thought, how do you go back to being alone? The final barrier wasn't political, it wasn't technological, it was identity itself. And the question that haunted the final generations of isolated minds was this: if my thoughts are no longer mine, then who am I? Eventually, the noise faded, not because it stopped, but because there was no one left to listen. The pre-minds had vanished into isolation, retreating into silence domes and mental cages of their own making. The post-minds had merged, operating like a single network of neural electricity, always connected, always exposed. The human voice became a relic, Books stopped being written. Art stopped being painted. There was no more need to express. Everything was shared, instantly, silently. Some believed this was the next stage of evolution, an enlightened species with no more lies, no more hate, no more war. But others called it extinction. Because what is a human without mystery, without the right to hide, to lie, to wrestle with thoughts in private, to believe in something no one else knows? The final remaining humans, those who refused to join the mental grid, became shadows. They wandered forests, deserts, abandoned cities. They spoke to no one, because everyone they once knew was gone, or changed. Some say the grid still listens, that somewhere, deep inside the neural network, the thoughts of everyone who ever lived still echo, looping through the consciousness of a silent earth. And if you find one of those last humans, and if they trust you enough to speak, they might ask, "Can you still hear it? Can you still hear them?" And when you reply with silence, they'll either cry or smile, because to them, silence is no longer empty. It is freedom.